Which job has, hands down, the worst impact on mental health? The FBI evidence sifters, in child sex cases. Weeks of freeze-framing children's faces during abuse videos, and matching that to databases, to identify the kids against other videos, missing children, etc., then putting it all in a timeline for prosecutors. Added to add, they have to watch these videos looping back over and over, to record audio, names, places, numbers, background noises, and any other evidence that might connect persons to acts or cases to other cases. I knew someone whose spouse worked in that area. Apparently, they are managed to spend a lot of time on the job to maintaining their mental health. Like, they have days where they'll do outdoor activities and such. Hopefully that helps them, because that's a effing brutal job. I always submit this story when this issue comes up, out of respect for this guy. I'm an older dude, and back in the day, I had a role to play in one of these prosecutions. Of a kiddie porn distributor. Now, historically, kiddie porn had been enforced by USPS postal inspectors. Because, historically, distribution had been through the mail. When we were doing our case, I met the postal inspector who would be our witness. For 20+ years, that's what this dude had done, testified in kiddie porn cases. Among the things you have to prove, with respect to each image, is that the person depicted was under 18 when the picture was taken. This dude was the one who was doing to do that for us. We had all the images collected in a 5 inches thick 3-ring binder. You could open to any page, and he'd name the person depicted, tell you, approximately, the date the picture was taken, and tell you how old that person was on that date. For many of the victims, our witness knew that, because he had met them, talked to them about the images, enlisted their help in prosecuting, in general, not on a case-by-case basis, and convinced them to share with him what had to be, in every case, horrifying experiences. And he remembered them all. Every story, every relative with a smile, and a candy bar. He knew all the stories by heart. And then, on a monthly basis, he would fly to someplace, and give a testimony. Recount the stories for the jury. Recount his meetings with the victims. He would be there, so that they didn't have to be. Anytime people talk about heroes they've met, I remember this guy. Just the most normal, average, mild-mannered guy you'd ever meet. And he spent at least half his working life doing this. My dad is an oncologist. He handles it well, but that has to be up there. Every time you meet a new patient, it's during one of the worst, if not the worst, time of their lives. And it's up to you to break it to them or their families, if the toxic treatment you have been administering is working or if they should give up hope and get their affairs in order. On top of that, you have them attending appointments, telling you the kind of toll the cancer is taking on their marriage. So many people walk away from their beloved partner of 30 years, rather than support them through this, not to mention their finances. I am still so unbelievably grateful to the oncologist, who helped my father understand he was terminal. My dad was endlessly optimistic, religious, and not particularly intelligent. Sorry, Dad. When his original oncologist tried to tell him he was terminal, he refused to give up hope. It was when he was hospitalized, due to complications, that a resident oncologist at the hospital came and sat with him for a good long time, and finally got him to understand that it was time to let go of that belief he might get better. I can't imagine what it does to a person to sit and make sure that someone understands there is no hope left in the world for them. I'm so grateful people like that exist, but it definitely couldn't be me. First responders will eventually watch a person die right in front of them, more than likely. Definitely have seen multiple die, as well as plenty of already dead, brains on walls, etc. None of it was nearly as bad as responding to a dying infant, then having to stand around while EMS is going through the motions, for the sake of the parents. My ex was a cop. He told me a lot about people dying in front of him, and how they stared at him, coughing up blood, looking very scared from being shot, or he had calls where kids die and the parents lost it. He had a hard time, especially with the kids being hurt. It really bothered him off of the job. It's not the worst, see, first responders and, apparently, veterinarians, but being an inner-city public school teacher broke me. Look, again, not as bad as those others, but I've seen and read enough that my decade in has been enough. I've had students murdered. One kid was shot for $12 worth of weed. I also taught the murderer. I've called DCS on many parents because my student came in beaten or starving. I paid for one of my students' lunches. because she was pregnant, and couldn't afford school lunch, seen brutal fights that have ended with hospitalization, and have also been hospitalized due to breaking up fights. You watch brilliant students discover drugs and overdose, you see kids with bright futures get pregnant and refuse to go to college, because they will be supported by the baby's father, who skipped town the day she gave birth, and you see kids fall through the cracks in the system to never be seen again. I've also reported 2 effing pervert teachers, one didn't have enough evidence, but he was still let go while the other currently enjoys prison. My first year, a few of us teachers started a club that would have lock-ins at the school, because some of the kids needed a place to get food, get clean, and be away from the danger of home. I've never played more Monopoly in my life, or eaten more Papa John's, and I really didn't like doing it, but it was worth it at graduation, when one of my students that never missed club thanked me, because it was the one night her mom's boyfriend couldn't get her. I still cry about it. I'm crying now. There were amazing positives. I have a few students, that are now doctors, that were once told that they would never graduate. Getting kids who couldn't read at the beginning of their freshman year to graduate with a full ride to college, is a feeling that I can't really compare to anything. But, at the end of the day, the lows are too low. I left the first school that I taught at 6 years ago, because we had an incident that definitely wasn't a school shooting that failed only, because the kid turned the corner directly into our school officer and, out of fear, the kid killed himself, instead of the kids on his list. I should have left then. But I thought it would get better, that I could handle it all. I can't. I'm tired. Update: this got bigger than I thought possible. Thank you all for reaching out. I've been trying to interact and comment on all of the posts. First things first, you do not need to thank me. I'm a singular voice in a sea of Title I teachers, and you can find them also in the comments. We all have stories like this, both incredibly positive and less so. To the people wanting updates, the girl who I helped feed is doing well and has 2 beautiful kids. I haven't heard from the girl in club, and I hope she has found peace. Also, I've been trying to stay vague enough, that I couldn't really be ID'd, but I have had one former student DM me, and they got my name right. If you are curious if I taught you, DM me, and I can tell you if I did or not. Also, my school was in the rural Midwest. This seems to be very important for a few people. Crime scene cleanup. Entire families murder-suicide. Seeing dead babies would wreck me. The smells. Bodies turned to soup, brains splattered, blood, lots of blood, feces and urine, pets taking a chomp, because they haven't been fed. Having to pull all carpet, pad and scrubbing subfloors. Extracting body juices. High probability of bioillnesses and biohazards, blood, or airborne pathogens. 100% will affect a sane person. One of my friends worked in a morgue. Not so recently, deceased comes in with his cat, who had been eating him, while trapped in the house for however long before being found. She adopted the cat, and named him Hannibal. Any job, where every day, you are constantly being exposed to other people's trauma. Secondhand trauma, day in and day out, wears on mental health. Thank you for saying this. Secondhand trauma and the compassion fatigue that goes with it are so real. I worked as an English professor in one of the poorest parts of the US, and I experienced the worst depressive episode of my life. I completely burned out after 2 years. There were only so many essays I could read about sexual abuse, poverty, and incarceration. Veterinarians have some of the highest rates of suicide. I'm going with that. It's very tough when they put a pet to sleep. I always thought it's cool to be a vet, until I met my husband. My vet cried with me when we put my cat to sleep. I was touched, but it was a bit of a surprise, since I was, apparently, the second euthanasia appointment of the day. What I hear from vets is that the people are the worst part of the job. Seeing evidence of neglect or abuse, clients refusing to pay for necessary medical interventions, etc. Watching animals suffering is hard enough, but knowing you, or the owner, could do something about it, but can't, or won't, has to be rough. I don't know if it's the worst, but maybe. I'm a retired detective. In the latter part of my career, I was tasked with running our Special Investigations Unit. One of our responsibilities was computer crimes. 95% of those were child sexual abuse media investigations, child porn to the lay person. I trained and got certified in computer forensics. As a result, I spent many hours poring through thousands upon thousands of child sexual abuse images and videos. The seething, white rage that would build up inside of me would necessitate an occasional break to go punch a wall, or other inanimate object. The other detectives outside of our enclosed lab got used to the occasional outbursts by my other computer forensic examiners and me. Most of the time I could endure it, but sometimes certain acts, or victims, would trigger rage in me that still affects me to this day. This in spite of the mandatory and regular therapy for our examiners that was established by policy. There is no redemption for people who abuse children. I am currently in this position, except I'm not an officer, just a civilian working for my state's police agency in their lab. Been doing this job for 5 years now. After going through enough of the content on a daily basis, I've been desensitized to most of it. However, when the cases are production cases, rather than simple possession or distribution, they'll tend to get to me a little more. Probably because these are kids that are, relatively, right up the road. Especially if I was the examiner on scene during the search warrant. My doesn't deserve top 10, but I worked at and paid Elroul's place for a few months. If that didn't feel like legally working for the devil, I don't know what does. My mom used to work for one of these places. She got fired for turning people away who obviously wouldn't be able to pay them back. That's their secret cap, no one is able to pay them back. You just keep renewing the loan until you lose your house. I have a friend who works for Child Protective Services. You wouldn't believe the number of times she's tried to get a child taken out of a horribly abusive home. Clear physical evidence of sexual abuse, etc., but the case falls through because the police won't provide a detective who is good with children. Then the child won't repeat accusations for official testimony. It's gotta be up there with first responders. My brother worked for Child Protective Services as a caseworker for almost 8 years, which is about 6 years longer than people typically last. He shared some about his job in conversations with me, but I know he kept a lot of the worst stuff to himself. I'm fully convinced that job played a large part in his path to drugs that eventually took his life. Social work is challenging. I was thinking this. I knew someone who was a social worker. She was the most happy, fun, carefree person you'd ever met. Until you asked her about her time as a social worker. It was hard seeing all the joy leave someone who had so much of it. You just knew she'd seen something that shouldn't be talked about. I've had children's services in and out of my life since my daughter was an infant. I started off like everyone else. I hated them. I treated them disrespectfully, and I hated their intrusion into my life. Then I accepted their help. 'Cause that's what they're there for. And I loved my caseworker. I was always honest with her and she did everything she could to keep my child with me. They bought us beds, and paid my $1,000 electric bill, and got me help for my drug addiction. Children's Services has a bad rap. But they don't deserve it. Psychiatric nurse, in the psychiatric inpatient hospital. In a state prison. Dealing with death row inmates. An old family friend was a prison psychiatrist. Many times she canceled on dinner plans with us, because she couldn't get rid of the smell of human shit that was hurled at her at work, and the number of times she'd been told to stay home, because a plan to kill her, or sexually assault her, had been found, or uncovered. It didn't really hit home how hard the job was, until I heard some of her, albeit minor by comparison, stories. She's an on-call mental health psychiatrist now. She deals with people who try everything in their power to kill themselves. As safer as she feels in the new job, it's not any easier, by any stretch of the imagination. Caregiver. 1. The racist. It's very hard to go on your day taking care of someone who spits in your face and calls you dirty while you're trying to help them wash up. 2. The way people just die after you've finally had a relationship with them and cared for them for months, and how fast that empty bed gets occupied. You don't get any counseling or therapy, but you're expected to go on normally with your work shift. Call center rep. I knew a guy who worked for a debt collection call center, and he said it was soul-crushing. I asked him if it was people screaming at him to F off when he called them that bothered him, and he said those calls actually weren't as bad as the alternative. The more troubling ones were the depressing stories of how debtors ended up in crippling debt, often verging on tears, as they're explaining this, and how they are struggling just to provide for themselves or their family, never mind to pay off whatever debt it is that they owe. Wildland firefighters. No one really talks about it, but since it's a part of my field of study, my instructor, who's been on a few hotshot crews, and knows so many people in the wildland firefighting industry, who have just ended their lives. You work 14-hour days, for 2 weeks or more, of some of the most physically demanding work anyone can do, usually can't shower, you're actively watching nature, including all its creatures being burned alive, moving their corpses, and possibly watching it destroy people's homes and lives. Not only that, but at any moment something can change, and you'll burn alive in the fire, too. It's not for the weak of heart, because even those who have the toughest hearts, are struggling with depression. This pales in comparison to the first comment, but here's one: probation and parole officers. We get to know their whole families. We cheer them on, when they succeed. We move heaven and earth to put things in place for success. No one talks about it, but when they pass away to violence and drugs, it hurts. I don't know if people truly know how bad the fentanyl crisis is. I spent a summer as a legal intern in the homicide division of the Orange County DA, and much of my job that summer was to review and catalog photos of the victims and crime scenes. Disproportionately children, since it was a job that no one really wants to do, so it's easy to pass off to interns. I have no idea how anyone does that long term. A few months was more than enough for a lifetime. Therapist. Listening to people's problems for 8 hours every day will be extremely taxing. Therapist here. You're not wrong, it's taxing AF. When you start thinking about how many people's lives and their issues you hold, it actually brings on major anxiety. All while dealing with your own lives and personal struggles, including our own mental health. It's wild. Self-care and combating burnout is not something they focus enough time on in grad school. You hit the field, basically blindsided, because your practicums were easy AF, and then all of a sudden, people, documentation, mandated reporting, referrals, your agency's policies, ethics, liability insurance, continuing education credits. Yeah, it's a lot. Does it have its rewards? Absolutely. Still a difficult job. That's why many of us have our own therapists. I'm actually shocked I had to scroll this far to see this. Social workers too, but therapists have it brutal, as well. It's not the worst, but my mother used to deliver Meals on Wheels. It's a program in the good states, to deliver food to the elderly, or homebound. She saved a few people in distress, and found her share of dead folks, which sucks. She was often the only person some of those people would see each day. It was heartbreaking, and she did it when she was even eligible to receive the meals, as she was elderly. I lost her to COVID, because stupid people ran our country. The journalist and historical author, Iris Chang, author of the book, The Rape of Nanking, went into a deep depression, worsened by the subject matter that she wrote about, and eventually committed suicide. Yeah, especially didn't help that many Japanese nationals harassed her on a daily basis, because they denied Japan committed war crimes against China. Honestly shocked me, when I finished the book, to see the blurb that writing it ended up killing her. Farming. Trust me. Work as hard as you can, do everything as correctly as possible. Live frugally. Be resourceful as you can. Weather, pests, equipment failure or repair, and commodity prices wipe out your chances of any reasonable profit, or profit at all. Sit with your accountant and banker, and be told again and again how much of a total failure you are, and that if you're going to get ahead in this world, you're just going to have to work harder. Meanwhile, they go home after a hard 6 hours at work, and you head right back to the field, to work until dark. I was an automation engineer once. Worked a reasonable amount of hours, and was well paid for it. Then for personal and family reasons, I started farming. I had to do it. This is effing peasant work, according to my accountant and banker, but it's infinitely more difficult than being an engineer ever was. I'm from a rural community. A few people in the surrounding area got ridiculously prosperous, and many more worked like angry bastards in the sun, for 14 hours a day, just to barely break even. It's a different sort of life, and I always get a little resentful towards the fantasizing, especially by privileged folks, trying to escape the city, done by those who I feel don't fully understand it, even if I fall in that group, to a degree. Food service workers. Constantly dehumanized, treated like garbage, even when service is damn near perfect. Injuries are common but brushed over, because you don't have time to be injured, and despite having shit wages, people will complain about having to tip, as if we're just greedy workers. Had a genuine panic attack in the kitchen, open for customers to see with it being a cafe, because me and my one co-worker, were rushed and everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong. Customers were awful before I even had a chance to mess up. People often complain about the prices, despite them being that way as a small business, that almost went under during the start of the pandemic, and because we are paid $9 an hour, compared to the usual $2 to $7 wages most baristas make everywhere else. However, $9 is still not a living wage. I only afford groceries and some of rent, because of the tip money I make. I like to think I'm a kind person who has faith in humanity, because I know not everyone is mean or evil. But when you're exposed to such a general part of the population, and constantly abused as a staff member by customers, it's hard to keep that positive worldview, and has definitely sent me into mental health spirals. Maybe we don't have it worse, compared to firefighters, or specific FBI evidence workers, but I'm a firm believer that the world would be a kinder place if everyone was required to work 2 years in the food service industry, or 3 years in customer service, or retail. I'm up to about 10 years in the industry, and I agree that it's incredibly draining, but for a different reason. I feel like over the years, I've lost sense of my own original personality. Sometimes, I don't even know who the hell I actually am, if I don't have a table, or a bar guest in front of me. Every table, every individual person at the bar, every group requires a different mask. A table of 20-somethings, who just came to grab some food after visiting their 4th bar of the night. That's one mask. A two-top of elderly retirees on vacation or visiting the city for the day? A totally, dramatically different mask. A single dude at the bar ordering his 4th beer before noon? That's a third mask, etc., etc., etc. Most of the time, you're switching between all of these different masks and personalities back to back to back. You wear so many different personalities for so many different people, all in the hopes that it's going to help you pay rent this month, and it does help. People obviously respond better if you can read them right and act accordingly, but which mask do you slip back into after you clock out? I leave work and sit at home alone. What else do you do? Your friends all want to hang out at some bar, that's where you spend all your time on the clock. I personally don't want to leave the bar I work at and spend all the tips I just made at some other bar just to hang out with near blackout drunk people, not if I'm not getting paid for it. Can't meet anyone new if you aren't going out, but you're too drained after 8+ hours of interacting with people, while trying on 15+ different personalities to even think about re-immersing yourself into a sea of strangers again. You have worked in 11 hours, and you're going to have to do that all over again anyways. Thank God, I'm not drinking the way that I used to, but damn it, it helped sometimes, in a super dysfunctional and unhealthy way. None of that even touches on the long and late hours, the ever-shifting schedule that ensures you'll never have a normal sleep schedule again. For a week, you close the bar, so you aren't home until 3 a.m. each morning. Tomorrow you're a swing, so you'll be home at 8 p.m. but you have to open at 10 a.m. the day after that. Good luck getting to sleep before 4 a.m. The all too often rude customers, the extreme expectations that can come from a particularly frustrating phone manager or GM, the injuries and sicknesses that you usually have to work through, though COVID did seem to change that for the better, at least in some bars/restaurants, it just goes on. Listen, serving and bartending isn't the hardest job I've ever had, and it's not the easiest job I've ever had either. I'm positive that there are many, many, many other fields that are much more demanding and draining. Not trying to woe is me this shit, I just sometimes feel like there's a lot about the industry that people don't consider if they haven't spent a good amount of time in it. I've heard trucking is really bad. Read about it in an article recently. They have to be away from home for days, if not weeks, at a time. It's really difficult to hold down a relationship or family in any way. A good portion of their time on the job is spent in a perpetual state of exhaustion. Coffee, Red Bull, and other caffeinated beverages are being used 24/7 to keep them awake long enough to finish the trip. Never a good night's rest, as you just sleep in whatever motel you find along the road, or just in the cabin of your vehicle. Not to mention that driving a vehicle for that long is physically exhausting. Imagine holding your arms up in front of you for 6 to 8 hours a day, every day of the week. I just entered trucking, from a lifetime of working a Walmart-type job. My company required us to be on the road living in the truck 4 weeks minimum, and you got 3 to 4 days home, max. I really couldn't cope with the lifestyle. It's very taxing mentally, and it's rare to see a friendly smiling face in the trucking world. A lot of the warehouse workers have crap attitudes, and the way your company schedules you, you're always running behind schedule, just sleep and drive, no time for yourself. Don't even get me started on how hard it is to find a place to park and sleep. There aren't enough parking spots at the truck stops. Many times I ran out of driving hours, and had to park in a place where too much was going on to sleep, like on a on-ramp to the interstate, where loud vehicles are constantly revving by. I quit 3 months into it. I will gladly work $12 per hour at Walmart, to avoid all the headaches I encountered trucking. I've been cop for only 2 years. I can never see people the same again, and I've experienced more stress in that time than I have my whole life. And I've already seen way more than you would imagine. Everything about the job sucks. The schedule is terrible, I never see my family or old friends. I go from 0 to 100 on stress, about 10 times a night. Unfortunately, I also work in a big city. Everyone hates me, and for some reason, it's become socially acceptable to be openly racist towards me. Every person I talk to is constantly lying to me, even the people who called me for help, because they want someone to get in trouble badly enough. When the 1 out of 10,000 cops does finally make a mistake, 5 states over, I have to pay for it with everyone's hate. I just wanted to save lives, and I already have saved more than I thought I would. But it's become so hard to put my vest on and get myself to work lately, and it crushes me to see some of my friends making 3 times my salary, working 6 hours a day from home, while I'm out here in the trenches every night. Every decision I make affects somebody's entire life and freedom, or could cost me or my co-worker's life. The amount of red tape I have to go through to do my job is insane. Most of the criminals I break my back to capture get released the next day, or get let go in court on some stupid technicality. Nobody wants the job I have anymore, so there are never enough coworkers to help me. We are always understaffed, and by the time I show up to the lower priority calls, I'm met with hate, because the response time is so bad. I get to hear Karen scream in my face about showing up hours later to her broken car window, even though 15 minutes ago, I just got done watching Jimmy gurgle his last breath succumbing to stab wounds, while his mom looks on in horror. Even if I quit tonight, I believe most of my naive innocence and optimism for life could be shattered, and the mental health effects could last me for the rest of my life. And the weird cherry on top is that I've become kind of addicted to the adrenaline, and activities that used to excite me in my non-working life can sometimes feel mundane and purposeless now.